Hello, and welcome to the World News Report. I'm Chris Cheney.
And I'm Ann Waldo, and these are today's top news stories.
In recent news, Justin Bieber was named Artist of the Year, prompting millions of 14-year-old girls across the globe to scream simultaneously, resulting in the rupturing of numerous eardrums in major cities across the world.
In sports news, the Lions are going to the Super Bowl for the first time in history.
For today's newscast, we have a special treat for all of our viewers, the Vietnam War. We opened up this topic onto our Facebook page and asked all of you to propose a question. As such, we chose the question proposed by David McGuire of Waterford, Michigan. David asked, to what extent was the conflict a civil war or a proxy war in the wider Cold War?
Thanks, Chris. Before we can answer this question, we have to look into the context of the war. After World War II, France wanted to claim the colonies it had lost to Japan, including Vietnam. France was forced to withdraw in 1954 after 8 years of fighting. After this, the 1954 Geneva Conference was held, and both sides were forced to come to an agreement. The US, China, and the Soviet Union were also involved. The Geneva Accords called for elections to choose a leader of a united Vietnam, sowing the seeds for war. However, they could not come to an agreement on a leader, so Vietnam was divided into a communist North and an anti-communist South. The orthodox view of the United States' involvement in the Vietnam War is that they feared the loss of Vietnam to communism would cause a chain reaction in the Southeast Asian countries, causing more and more to succumb to communism. John F. Kennedy came into office after the U.S. became involved, so he was uninformed about the situation from the orthodox point of view. Now back to Chris with the revisionist view.
Thanks, Anne. The revisionist view is that this may not be the truth, since the U.S. still had a military advantage over the Soviet Union, and instead was more concerned about protecting the U.S.'s power in the region. Now, we are going to cut over to our sister network, Fox 2 News, for a more extremist view of the war. Thanks, Bill and Glenn. I think. The U.S. supported the anti-communist South Vietnam, with Diem as Prime Minister. The Geneva Accords were possibly violated several times. It is possible that North Vietnam provided military assistance to the communist guerrillas in the South, known as the National Liberation Front, or Viet Cong. It is also possible that the South violated the Accords by postponing the elections under the argument that fair elections could not be held in the North.
The U.S. provided minor military aid to the South from 1957 to 1959. When the Bay of Pigs incident occurred, President Kennedy was portrayed by his political opponents as soft on communism. By the end of 1961, he decided to increase military aid to South Vietnam.
At first, little progress was made. The U.S. government blamed Diem for his anti-Buddhist policies. In May 1963, a deputy provincial chief ordered police to open fire on a Buddhist religious celebration. 9 Buddhists were killed. A month later, a Buddhist monk committed self-combustion, asking Diem to show charity and compassion to all religions. Photographs of this incident appeared in U.S. newspapers, starting the anti-war movement, mainly on college campuses, with college teens, aka hippies.
Diem was overthrown in a military coup, with General von Min coming to power. He was then overthrown 2 months later by a different group, who installed Nguyen Thanh. Shortly afterwards, Kennedy was assassinated and Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson took his place. He believed that the United States had a better chance for victory and did not withdraw, although signs indicated that Kennedy was leaning towards withdrawing from the war. Now we're going to go to a series of flashbacks on the Vietnam War, with Renee Pendrengi reporting live at the time.
This is Renee Bonquiqui reporting live from Vietnam. Nuclear winter has seemed to set in. Oh my god, and I think the U.S. Maddox was just fired upon. Looks like the U.S. Maddox and the Turner Joy detected a torpedo attack. Well, this spells trouble. Lyndon Johnson, the president, just convinced Congress to pass the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, accepting an unofficial war. The president now has power to do whatever he believes necessary in Vietnam. However, some sources are denying the existence of a torpedo, stating it as false justification to take up arms. The U.S. just enlisted the help of Australia and New Zealand, and oh my gods, the U.S. just used Agent Orange and napalm to destroy a village. Well, I don't think the scale of this disaster is even believable. The Tet Offensive, the North Vietnamese plan to take over major cities in the south, failed. The resultant deaths compounded with previous deaths and causing an uproar back in the U.S. Sounds like the president's plan for demilitarization is failing, and he is losing popularity very quickly. Massacre looks like a platoon of U.S. soldiers just massacred several of hundreds of Vietnamese civilians, and I can't keep going. But at least the monsoon has brought the end of the war.
Now wasn't that grand? After the war was over, Vietnam was united, but at a great cost and under a communist government. U.S. citizens distrusted the government more after the war and resented the armed forces, whom they believed were renegades. This caused a rift in the U.S. population. The Vietnam War was also the longest and costliest overseas war the United States had ever fought.
Back to our guiding question, Chris. To what extent was the conflict a civil war or a proxy war in the wider Cold War?
Well, it really was a civil war for Vietnam. There were already North Vietnamese insurgents in the South before the United States was involved, so tension did exist between the two groups. Vietnam had also just fought a war with France, ending their status as a colony, so it was also politically unstable from that conflict. The Soviet Union also provided little aid to the North due to the Sino-Soviet split.
But Chris, the United States was involved under the idea of stopping the spread of communism. Kennedy was afraid of the idea of being soft on communism. China also provided aid to North Vietnam both economically and militarily, openly declaring the United States as aggressors. Vietnam was viewed as a possible satellite country of China, similar to the USSR and Cuba. This war was also considered a loss for the United States due to the communist takeover. All of this points to one thing: a proxy war for the Cold War.
I agree, Anne. Overall, to answer the question, it was roughly 40% a civil war and 60% a proxy war for the Cold War. Thank you to our viewers, and thank you for watching this newscast.